hope will have out next year. And to cover what is in there, of course, supply and demand, as you hear economists talk about supply and demand all the time, they can't even derive a market demand curve. What they draw in the textbooks is mathematically impossible to derive. And they found that by asking conditions of under which conditions can the individual demand curve that they can derive within their theory, can that be turned into a market demand curve? And look at how it's described in the textbook. What they proved was, this is quite weird, but they said we can derive a downward sloping demand curve for an individual consumer in one market. Can we do that for more than one consumer? And the answer was yes, they can, under two conditions. First condition, all consumers are identical. Second condition, all goods are identical. In other words, they can derive, it's proof by contradiction that they can't do it. This is exactly the same thing the Pythagoreans did when they tried to prove that the square root of 2 was a rational number and contradicted their assumptions. And by that method, developed a fantastic mathematical tool, but also showed that there were irrational numbers. Not all numbers were A over B. So what economists did, they proved that you could have a downward sloping market demand curve if and only if there was one consumer and one commodity. Therefore, you can't have a downward sloping market demand curve. Well, instead they said, oh, well, let's assume that all people are the same and all goods are the same and build our models that way. Now, of course, they don't write it that way. What they say is things like this. The marginal propensity to consume is independent of the level of income of any consumer and constant across consumers. Okay? Now, when students learn this stuff, you don't learn this stuff in first year, second year, third year, or even fourth year of an undergraduate degree. You normally do it, if you learn it at all, you learn it when you get a so-called advanced text in microeconomics, when you're doing a PhD qualifying program. Now, if you've gone that far, you're normally so brainwashed, and the real thinkers have been driven out by the mundanity of the thought, that only the autistic lot are left who are going to go through and believe this nonsense. Okay? So that's what they end up believing. And I love this. That quote from Varian is the textbook version. This is the person who first discovered it. Now, sometimes when people discover this stuff, it causes them to change their whole lives, and they leave the profession. So this actual condition is known as the Sonnenschein Mantel-Debreu conditions, and the first of those three people resigned from academia as an academic and became a bureaucrat instead, which is, I must admit, a bureaucrat is actually a more productive individual than an economist. Don't often say things like that, but that'd be true. But the guy who first wrote it showed just how deluded economists are by the way he expressed these conditions he found. Have a look at this. The necessary and sufficient conditions quoted above is intuitively reasonable. It says, in effect, that an extra unit of purchasing power should be spent the same way no matter to whom it is given. Does that sound intuitively reasonable to you? Or would you lock the bugger up? Okay? That,
if you give us all $1, we're all going to spend it the same way?
Pardon? Yeah. The way I wrote about it in the book is to say that if Bill Gates is walking through a subway tunnel and comes across a derelict in the street begging for money, he'll give the derelict $1, and the derelict will go and buy a couple of copies of Leonardo da Vinci's Coda. And equally, if the beggar gives Bill Gates $1, Bill Gates will go and buy a bottle of methylated spirits. I mean, come on, you know. So they call that rational. Now, I've mentioned one flaw with the general equilibrium model. That's the way Volra put it together, where he was simply wondering, can you actually work out prices and equilibrium now? The other thing, for general equilibrium to apply through time, you have to actually have all those conditions being replicated, not just now at a moment in time, but to the future. Well, how do you handle that? They assume they know the future. Now, I'm not joking. This is the guy who wrote this got a Nobel Prize. This is Gerard Debreu. And he got a Nobel Prize in economics for building a mathematical model of general equilibrium, which was, by the way, totally symbolic. There was no actual attempt to actually implement this model. But have a look at this. This is how he, I keep on going back, this is how he, I've got to give a prelude to this because you're not going to believe it when you see it, but I'm like, you might think I ran out of battery power. I hope this recording is working here. He has to handle the future somehow. So he brings in, how do you handle uncertainty about the future? And then he says it for a producer and for a consumer and so on. Have a look at this. For a producer, a production plan made now for the whole future is a specification of the quantities of all his inputs and all his outputs. The certainty assumption implies that he knows now what input-output combinations will be possible in the future. Okay? Then you have what he calls contingent contracts. So to get around uncertainty about the future, you have a condition on an event of, I'll wait till the text finishes appearing on the screen there. They bring in what they call contingent contracts to handle uncertainty. So the idea is you buy an umbrella at a set price in Michigan on November 14th if it's raining. But if it's not raining, you don't take delivery. Therefore, you have these contingent contracts. There's no possibility of you being surprised by any future outcome. And notice what he says down the bottom. This new definition of a commodity allows one to obtain a theory of uncertainty free of any probability concept and formally identical with a theory of certainty developed in the previous chapters. Holy hell. Okay? They've got the hide to call themselves rational and attack people who criticise them, you know. Finance